Good afternoon, Chairwoman Kruger, Chairwoman Weinstein, and other distinguished chairs and members of the legislature. I am Anthony J. Annucci, Acting Commissioner for the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. It is my honor to discuss some of the highlights of Governor Cuomo's executive budget plan. Specifically, the proposed criminal justice agenda will continue its transformation of rehabilitation in the state and advance fundamental fairness for all New Yorkers. Since the governor took office, the incarcerated population has decreased by nearly 10,000 people, representing a 17% reduction. The fact that New York continues to be the safest large state in the country is proof that Governor Cuomo's smart, fair, and firm criminal justice policies are fundamentally sound and working well. Over the past 2 years, the department has worked with state and local partners to implement a law raising the age of criminal responsibility in stages to 18. In 2018, we transitioned to facilities, Hudson and Adirondack, to serve the needs of adolescent offenders and provide age-appropriate services. This year, the department will finish renovations to a third and final facility, the Groveland Annex, to coincide with the full implementation of Raise the Age in October 2019. The overall safety of our staff and the security of our facilities and offices remain a top priority. Last year, we increased our use of canines and expanded the use of pepper spray statewide. This year, working with the unions, we will continue to explore technological solutions, training initiatives, and policy modifications. We will also extend our first-in-the-nation body camera pilot beyond the 5 current facilities and continue the installation of fixed camera systems. Under Governor Cuomo's leadership, we continue to implement the historic Night Crew Settlement Agreement, drastically reforming and reducing our use of special housing units. Last year, we were able to close or convert more than 1,200 SHU beds, and this year, we will open a 252-bed step-down unit at Southport. These efforts have significantly reduced the number of individuals serving an SHU sanction in SHU by 40% and shortened the average time spent in a SHU cell by 30%. Building upon this success, the executive budget includes bold new legislation that would codify the parameters of the settlement agreement and establish new residential rehabilitation units that will allow individuals serving a disciplinary sanction to receive ample out-of-cell programming, address their underlying misbehavior, and reinforce pro-social behavior. When fully implemented, no individual would serve more than 30 days in SHU. The proposal also requires specialized training, both for staff assigned to the various units and for our disciplinary hearing officers. Through these reforms, we will successfully provide incarcerated individuals with the services and treatment they need while continuing to keep staff, the population, and visitors safe. The population served by DOCS is not immune to the opioid epidemic plaguing society at large. To counter this epidemic, DOCS has launched several programs over recent years, including the widespread training of both staff and the population in Narcan, and the provision of kits to those being released. The department has also established medication-assisted treatment, MAT, programs at 6 facilities to provide appropriate pharmaceuticals and counseling to individuals with substance use disorders and short periods of incarceration. This year's executive budget provides the resources to expand MAT programs to 3 additional facilities, ensuring a smooth continuity of care with community-based providers and reducing the likelihood of overdose. For women in DOCS custody, we recognize that their pathways into the criminal justice system are often different than their male counterparts. A significant number of incarcerated women have been victims of domestic violence, sexual abuse, or assault. While the department continues to provide the latest in trauma-informed care, the governor has advanced legislation, the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, to meaningfully reduce criminal sentences in certain circumstances and allow for some currently incarcerated survivors to apply for resentencing and earlier release due to prior victimization. The executive budget will also build upon previous reentry initiatives to improve outcomes for formerly incarcerated individuals. The governor's 4-point plan to ease unfair burdens, practices, and barriers will ensure that all returning individuals have the tools they need to succeed. Additionally, to address the aging prison population, compassionate release legislation has been advanced for certain individuals over 55 with incapacitating medical conditions that are exacerbated by their age. The department's community supervision staff leverage evidence-based practices such as swift, certain, and fair sanctions, and use incentives and rewards to encourage positive behavior for individuals on parole, with the goal of reducing the number of violators and returns to prison. To that end, the department will work with the Board of Parole to implement revised regulations governing the parole revocation process, and will partner with a community-based organization to further explore alternatives to incarceration for the parolee population. DOCS will also continue to support the Board of Parole in all administrative activities, ensuring the members' ability to set the terms for successful reentry and reintegration into society. In conclusion, this year will bring bold new reforms to improve our criminal justice and correction system, leading to greater fairness and equality. The governor's budget positions the department to successfully implement these proposals, bringing a positive impact to the entire agency. None of this would be possible without our professional, well-trained, and dedicated workforce who perform their daily and oftentimes dangerous duties in an exemplary manner. Every day, this department reaffirms its mission to operate safe and secure facilities while providing incarcerated individuals and parolees with the programs and services they need to succeed. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. And you get extra points for going under 10 minutes. Thank you. Our first questioner is Senator Sepulveda-Vich. Is that Vich? Sepulveda-Vich.
I think by the end of the hearings we'll get it right.
Now I'm just going to keep making up names for you now.
It's Sepulveda, just to remind you. Commissioner, is it afternoon? Good afternoon, yes. Glad I get to see you in person.
It's good to see you.
So I have several questions to ask. Let's start with shock reform. I try to ask the person testifying before you that he said to ask you. The governor is assuming a $360,000 savings associated with allowing individuals eligible for shock. How many people does the executive or your department foresee being eligible the first year?
Under the governor's proposal,
yes,
where we're expanding to allow judges to issue court-ordered shock enrollment orders if you're convicted under a particular subdivision of robbery in the second degree and burglary in the second degree, we estimated about 72, and that is always hard to pin down because, number one, we don't know exactly how many individuals come to us under those particular subdivisions. We changed the law in '95 to require the clerk to issue that, but they don't always do that, so I just know generically how many Berg 2s are in the system, how many Rob 2s are in the system. Plus you have the element of plea bargaining, so it's a best guesstimate at this point in time.
Okay. Now, there were about 1,000 people that are incarcerated after being arrested for one of these two charges that qualify under shock. Represents about 16% of all those sentenced to prison for violent felonies in that year. Preventing a prison sentence for this population altogether would generate massive savings. Has DJS, your division, explored alternative options to completely avoid incarceration for people under this category?
Oh, absolutely. We do support alternatives to incarceration, and so many of the governor's policies have helped reduce the prison population, including all of the back-end reforms, which is why in the last calendar year there are 2,800 less individuals incarcerated in state prison than there were on December 31st, 2017.
So recently we held hearings, public hearings on the issue of parole, and one of the big questions is why have we been stuck on 12 members on the board instead of 19. And is it accurate to say that 19 is the highest number of commissioners? Because I believe it's higher than 19.
I think that's set by statute, yes.
The 19 is set per statute. All right, so, I mean, I know part of it was who had control, or not control, but who was the majority party in the Senate as to why we don't have 19 members. I believe the governor did not include any additional funding to fund the parole board at 19 members. My question is why, and what is the intention or the plan to get us at 19?
Senator, when the department was merged with the Division of Parole, the legislature made it clear that as commissioner, I was to ensure they needed and had all the resources they needed and required, but that their decision-making, including that of the administrative law judges, was to be independent. So my job is basically to make sure they have the resources that they need, and I'm not in a position to speak to what is and is not authorized for filling additional vacancies. All right.
Is it premature to ask about statistics for parole releases in 2018?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Is it too premature to ask for statistics on parole releases for 2018?
Yeah, I think it is a little premature at this point in time, but bear in mind that two things. One is the number of technical parole violators who came back last year was the lowest in quite a number of years. It was definitely lower than the year before. The other thing is that we did collaborate with the Board of Parole. There are new proposed parole revocation guidelines. And when they were originally enacted in 1997, and that was when we viewed the world as either nonviolent or violent, and if you were a parolee for a violent crime, you paid a much stiffer penalty for a violation of a rule. This is now going to change that dramatically. We're focusing strictly on the actual underlying behavior without regard to what the actual original crime is. So we feel that this will further, if we get to implement it, reduce the number of technical violators returned to state prison.
Now, can you explain or let us know some of the provisions in that guidelines that allow you to reduce the number of people that have violated on technicalities? Because apparently when people are returned to prison, their time served is longer than some people who are actually convicted of a crime because of violations. So what is it that the guideline is doing to decrease these technical violations and allow people to remain out of the system, out of prison?
I do know that there was a lot of time and effort that was spent with the ALJs and with our community supervision staff and our reentry specialists and our parole revocation specialists to come up with 4 different categories for the technical parole violators. And a lot of the ALJs, and what we've already been doing, and this will codify this, when you merged us, you wanted us to enact graduated sanctions as a response to technical parole violations. So even though someone may have to come back to prison for a brief time, rather than the usual year and a half or a year or whatever, we have what's called parole diversion programs at a number of facilities. These are 45-day programs. They're meant to try and intercede before behavior possibly becomes a crime. But we hold the incentive out that the individual that participates in that will not lose the ability to have an early merit discharge from their sentence. So we're trying to balance a lot of things, do what the legislature wanted with graduated sanction. And I have been specifically instructing parole officers. This is the new day. The old day was, to use a football analogy, you were like the referee who knew what the rules were and you threw the flag for the appropriate infraction. Now you have to be more like the coach. You have to put people in a position to succeed. We want all of our parolees to succeed. That means working with them. That means working with families. Today, for the first time, we are having an event in New York City gathering the friends and families of parolees, just for them. Parolees can come if they want, but we want to talk to them and tell them how important they also are in helping us to try and have parolees succeed while they're out there.
Thank you. We have...
I'm sorry, you have 3 more minutes.
All right. So I have a bill on solitary confinement, the HALT bill, and the governor's proposal is unfortunately not anywhere near what we're attempting to establish with HALT. I'll give you some examples. The proposal will only prohibit placement of adolescents in segregated confinement if they are in adolescent facilities. It would not restrict the placement in segregated confinement of individuals with mental health disabilities. The proposal has other elements of it that I think will not help us achieve where we want to be in terms of segregated confinement. Can you opine about
Sure, Senator. First of all, let me say that both the governor's agenda, my agenda, and your agenda, we have the same goals, right? We don't want to have anybody suffer any consequences as a result of having to separate them from the population. My former colleague is now retired from Colorado, Rick Ramish. He uses the term restrain, don't isolate. And very much that is what this proposal will do, would be able to separate, but build out the programs that we will need in order to be able to do this in an effective manner, to provide the individuals with the appropriate out-of-cell time programming. This would be the third major phase of reforming our restricted housing units. The first one, which everybody is familiar with, was what we did for the seriously mentally ill, enacting the statute that where we built out what are called these RMHTUs, the BHU, the RMHU at Marcy and 5 Points, the ICP, the IICPs, about 1,000 therapeutic beds that we've created to divert seriously mentally ill if they get a sanction and have to be diverted from SHU. The next phase that we did was the current agreement, which we're still implementing. All of those programs that we built were meant to provide alternative environments, such as at Midstate, such as at Lakeview, such as the step-down units at Greenhaven and Wendy. And now the centerpiece is going to be the 252-bed unit at Southport, all of which is designed to provide an alternative environment for those in SHU. This next round, right, is a very ambitious schedule we're going to build, because you have to physically build the infrastructure at these places. Unfortunately, in the 90s, when we didn't have enough space, we just went cheap. We didn't know what we know now, and had we known then, we would have built them differently. But the governor's plan gives us a responsible way forward, and I strongly suggest that if there are specific concerns between the two bills, we can sit down, we can go over them, we can address them. We continue to meet with the advocates in the NICLU. They're giving us feedback. We're looking at other changes to be made. Perhaps they could be incorporated into the bill and address your concerns.
Well, certainly I'd like to have a continued discussion about that, because you know, that's incredibly important to our communities.
Yes.
And the advocates have been discussing with us for a while. So I want to make sure that, you know, of course, I'm not going to throw out the good for the perfect, but I also don't want to essentially water down something that I think is important to my committee and to people that are incarcerated.
Thank you, Senator. Assembly.
Assemblyman Weapron, Chair of the Corrections Committee.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Senator.
I want to start off by saying this is the third year that we've been working together, and I appreciate the close relationship we have with DOCS and with your office personally in the Assembly, and we hope that will continue.
Okay.
I have a bill, you know, on geriatric parole or compassionate parole, whatever you want to call it. And actually, based on your testimony, I think a couple of years ago, we changed that bill from 60 to 55, and I see the governor's using that 55 as well. One of the differences, though, is our bill, you know, which would require somebody to be 55 and having served 15 years, so it's not somebody that just committed a crime, does not have some of these health restrictions. You know, we understand the health issues, but part of the problem is, you know, by the time a lot of people, and I know there are a couple of those situations where someone's in very bad medical condition, they often pass away before they're granted parole. So we would like to see the eligibility and people actually getting parole while they're still, they may be older, but they could still be healthy and not necessarily in bad health per se, other than having spent 15 years incarcerated, obviously ages people. Would you have an objection to that, going in that direction?
Well, Assemblyman, as you know, I can't comment on pending legislation other than what's already in the Governor's Article 7. I think we share the same goals here. What I can tell you that's different about the Governor's compassionate release compared to prior bills, and this goes to trying to speed the results, is that the initial determination that someone meets the medical criteria does not require either my doctor or myself to also make a determination that that person, if released, is not going to be a danger to society. That function is now going to be reserved solely for the Board of Parole, who'll make that after an interview. So I no longer have to have physicians worried about, gee, if I certify this guy as being eligible for geriatric parole, and if he commits a crime, I'm going to be responsible for that. We've removed that from them under the wording of the Governor's bill, which I think is a positive step forward.
Well, we're getting closer. But can you tell me what the average cost of incarcerating an older person is?
It depends on where they're housed. We happen to have a number of individuals in other settings other than what you might be thinking of, which is our RMUs, our regional medical units, where if you get to that stage where you require nursing care, it's very expensive. It's well over $100,000. We also have a senior dorm, which we recently opened at Ulster under the Governor's initiative a couple of years ago, where we're providing to this cohort age-appropriate programming, getting them involved in a lot of different things that are specific to their needs. I toured that a month or so ago, and it's going very well. We might replicate it elsewhere. Other individuals are functioning. They could be, severely arthritic. They could require wheelchairs. They run the gamut. So it depends upon where they're located, what the level of care is. And I think the big key here is age. That is going to be one of the factors to guide the Board of Parole as to whether or not they're going to be dangerous or not if released.
I appreciate that. Can you tell me statistically how many older people were granted and released on medical parole in 2018?
How many older people?
Yeah, how many?
I'd have to go back and look at the age. I just know that I don't know now.
If I told you 8 people, would that sound like it's a valid statistic?
It sounds reasonable.
Okay. Well, we obviously would like to see more, and that's one of the reasons
why. Yeah, and in general, we want everybody who's worthy of medical parole to be considered in due course. And one of the things I've done, separate and apart from the Governor's bill, is I had televideo conferences with all of our staff at our regional medical units, where a lot of these individuals are, under the former chief doctor, Dr. Carl Koenigsman, who's since retired. But what we stress to them is similar to what this bill would do. Do not worry about whether the individual poses a risk. Let the board make that determination. We simply want you to make the medical diagnosis, tell us what the current state is, tell us what they're capable of doing, and in the case of terminal cases, try and predict in advance, even if today they may be somewhat functional, that the normal progression, because there are time limits built into the statute. I have to send out the 30-day notices or the 15-day notices if it's terminal, et cetera. I have to wait for responses back from the courts, and then you have to set up the interview. So we told them, back it up a little bit so you can build in those bureaucratic steps, and we can have individuals considered and approved in appropriate manner.
Okay, thank you. I want to show my agreement with my Senate counterpart, Senator Sepulveda, whose comments on increasing the shock incarceration eligibility as well as the SHU reform. So I don't want to repeat it, but I just want to reiterate my support as well, and particularly on trying to bring the parole commissioners up to 19, which of course is the statutory allowance, and there have been so many problems with people getting parole because of a shortage of commissioners. And one of my staffers from the Assembly, Tana Agostini, went over to the parole commissioner. I think she's doing a great job. We'd like to see the full commission up to 19, because we know their parole commissioners are overworked, they're traveling all around the state, people are waiting a long time to get a hearing, and I think part of the problem is that we were always short parole commissioners. So I want to reiterate what my counterpart in the Senate mentioned, is we'd like to try to see the full commission up to 19. If you could convey that back to the governor on behalf of both houses, that would be appreciated. I would like to touch on something else that I've been contacted about, which I haven't brought up before. DOCS acquired a voice recognition program from Securus Technologies that gathers voice prints on most of the inmate population. You familiar with that?
Yes.
Can you explain how it works, and are the voice prints being collected from people outside of the prison, like friends, family, etc.?
No, it's not from the outside. It's strictly for the population that they register when they use the phones. And the purpose is so that we can have better intelligence on potentially nefarious activities. The phone home program is very important to us because it's a means by which the individuals can stay in touch with their families and with their relatives. But it's also a means by which crimes can be plotted, conspiracies, etc. So it's also an important source of intelligence for us. We do, by the way, have among the lowest phone calls in the rates in the country, which I believe right now under the new contract is 0.043 cents.
Oh, they've gotten better, and we've discussed that, and I appreciate that going there. An issue that was raised to me was are inmates, first let me ask the question, are inmates mandated to roll in the voice recognition program in order to use the telephone?
In order to register, yes, they have to agree to that.
See, that could be a problem because there are some inmates that did not want to register with the program for fear of, monitoring and possible unnecessary monitoring. And at that point, they're not allowed to use the phone. I'd like to see some kind of provision if someone has a legitimate concern about being monitored, that they should not be denied phone privileges. Can you look into that?
Well, for an individual that wants to have a confidential conversation with their lawyer, we set that up all the time. We have arranged a special system where they can have a call if it's required, and we don't just willy-nilly grant it, but they can have a separate call with their lawyer or a government official or whomever. So that's outside of the existing network.
Okay, and I'm running out of time, but I just want to touch on one other subject. And we had the chancellor from SUNY and CUNY here, and you and I agree, and I know the governor agrees, on expanding educational programs in our state correctional facilities. And I know you and I have personally participated in John Jay College's graduation and programs at many facilities, as well as at Otisville. We were together on a number of occasions. And Mohawk Valley Community College has a program, Bard has a program, Cornell has a program. I'd like to see an expansion of the amount of institutions, particularly at the SUNY level, because there's so many SUNY facilities that are near state correctional facilities. Would you support that type of expansion?
Oh, I support all expansion of college programs. We right now have it in 29 different correctional facilities. I've been attending the graduations for the first time at facilities like Green. A couple of weeks ago, I went to Mohawk, I went to Bear Hill, we had one at Franklin. And I think the documentary, when it's released in October of this year, which is done under the auspices of Ken Burns, and he really does a good job when he produces a documentary, I think that's going to tell the whole country the value of higher education in a correctional facility setting and what it means.
I think I'm out of time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senate.
Thank you. Let's see, we've been joined by Senator Robert Antonucci, by Senator Gallivan, I think Senator Brian Benjamin, some we have returning from other events. But next up is Senator Jamal Bailey, Chair of the Codes Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Senator.
I appreciate your testimony, and I associate myself with the comments of both Chairman Weprin and Chairman Sepulveda concerning the educational aspects, the fulfill of the parole board, and the SHU issues. But I wanted to talk about opioids. You know, long before an opioid crisis was something that we heard of, the opioids were long rampant, and I won't editorialize about that and about why it's a crisis now, but I'm glad it's being recognized. And I appreciate that there have been steps taken towards more treatment of opioids, and my understanding that now 6 facilities offer a form of medical assisted treatment. Is that
Yes.
accurate? Okay. So I have a piece of legislation, Bill number 2161, that would provide comprehensive access to medication. Has the executive or has the agency taken a position on that legislation?
Well, again, I don't comment on specific bills, but Senator, I'll tell you, again, we share the same goals. We want to provide the treatment that is needed that will get the most bang for the buck. The opioid crisis is horrific. The carnage in this country is horrific, and we in New York State want to do everything possible. The next thing we're doing, even separate and aside from what's announced in the budget, is what we're doing under the existing budget. And before this fiscal year is out, we are going to the next correctional facility, which is Elmira, a maximum security facility. We've already got New York City lined up for this. And through this program, they've agreed they're going to give us a supply of methadone for a newly sentenced inmate who's already on MAT. They'll give us the supply, transport them to downstate. We have the outside provider lined up. Then we're going to go to transport that individual to Elmira, where they'll continue on MAT. And again, we have a separate provider on the outside. So that this now opens up a whole new avenue, significant avenue with possibilities, because Elmira is a reception center, which means it not only can now accept newly sentenced individuals from New York City, but down the road, as we expand, other counties, and this is where we hope it'll happen significantly, jails providing more MAT to individuals. And if they do that, then the individuals that are on MAT and get a short sentence, and with just now playing with a 2 years or less time to your earliest release date, but technical parole violators who are on MAT. And then for the 3 facilities beyond that, we can possibly expand it, possibly out west where a county like Monroe might be embracing this. So we are very grateful the governor has given these resources, and we are ready to significantly expand and get the most value for our investment, which is those individuals who are short-termers who are turning around, and we can always build from there.
I am appreciative of those comments and of the executive's desire, as well as mine and many of my colleagues in the state legislature, to ensure that people who are suffering from addiction get the treatment that they need despite their status of incarceration. So it's heartening to hear that. I just have a couple of more questions. One is more about promulgation of certain rules. Let's say an individual is representing somebody in an immigration matter. Are there settings concerning the confidentiality? Because certain attorneys that I've spoken to that represent individuals in removal proceedings have had concerns about the confidentiality of their ability to counsel their clients in said proceedings. Are there specific rules around that?
I do know that in the immigration court, it is considered a public courtroom, so that if outsiders want to come in, they can. I also know that, we try and accord the attorney-client privilege, so if someone needs to be able to meet with their client and talk confidentially before on the record. I also know, by the way, that PLS reached out to me for support in getting funding so that they could have an attorney provide representation, and I wrote a letter of support for them so that they could get the outside funding to provide representation to individuals in pending immigration matters in the immigration court. And I think they either have 1 or 2 items devoted to that, and we continue to cooperate and schedule phone calls or meetings with them so that they can provide the necessary representation.
Sure. And just last, it's a hybrid comment question. Senator Sepulveda, Senator Rivera, and Senator Gallivan and I were at a I would call it a quasi-hearing, right, Senator Sepulveda, late last year. And when we had individuals that came back concerning reentry, and they spoke about a couple of issues. And I guess the issue that I would bring up would be JPay and some of the issues with the fees and the sliding scales. Your familiarity with JPay and any of the concerns about some of the fees that are initiated on the parolees?
We are looking forward to rolling out the tablet program. We think that that's going to be transformative for the whole system. We're going to start with the female offenders because that's a much smaller unit to work with at the end of the month. We're going to have them in our SHUs. The basic programming will be free for everyone, but we're also continuing to monitor what other costs are and elsewhere in the country. So if we see that some other state has got a lower rate on a particular service that they're providing, we're certainly going to pick up the phone and say, wait a minute, you have to treat us comparably in that area. So I've always been very, very mindful of the population, limited means from their family, and not in any way charge them more than anything beyond what has to be the case.
Thank you. And my final question is related to some of the rules concerning parolees. Our economy has changed since these initial rules come in, and having to check in with the officer is understandable. I believe there should be check-ins, but in the expansive digital economy where people have to maybe leave on a more frequent basis, this often prevents people from legitimate opportunities for income. And less of a question, more of a statement and commentary. I would urge docs to look at these rules that could possibly prevent people who have paid their debt to society. They have done what we've asked them to do. They are trying to do the best that they can for their families, and they're still limited in the incomes that they can receive. I would just urge us to take a look at the rules and how we can possibly have more flexibility for people based upon their profession.
Yes, absolutely, Senator.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Assembly.
Assemblywoman Rozek.
I think this is on. Hi, Commissioner.
Hi,
I have
Senator.
a lot of questions and it bounces around, so bear with me. I wanted to also talk about the parole board a little bit. I agree that we should be trying to fill those 7 spots that are empty. Can you tell us if there's a timeline or describe the process by which you're trying to engage people out in the community and get candidates for the parole board?
Okay, if I understood your question correctly, you're asking about the preparation of individuals who are appearing before the Board of Parole?
No, I'm asking what are you doing in order to fill?
I'm sorry. I misunderstood the question. My apologies.
That's okay.
I can't speak to a timeline to fill parole vacancies. That's between the administration and the Board of Parole.
Okay. I know that also DOCS has a long-term plan for a single digital database for the parole board when they're doing their video hearings. I know that that has been an issue. So can you describe or tell us whether or not there's money in this budget in order to have digitized copies of records of each prisoner?
Okay. We are at the initial stages of exploring the possibilities for electronic records, and we've got a meeting with our ITS, and we're exploring that, and also for our health records. Right now, we've worked very closely with the Board of Parole. Our staff prepare the files for them, and they prepare them in such a way that each commissioner will know exactly which section of the file will have the information he or she is looking for, whether it's program participation, disciplinary records, etc. Then after every parole interview session, there's a write-up, and they give us feedback as to what worked well, what didn't work well, televideo, et cetera. Another initiative that we've done for the population, and we've worked with the parole commissioners on this, we created a DVD where we have formerly incarcerated individuals, parolees, as well as parole commissioners, explaining to them what the process will be like, what they can expect, so that they're at ease, they know what to expect. They can talk about their plans in their own words, and the Board of Parole will consider
Okay.
that.
I'm going to cut you off only because I don't have that much time. I also reiterate that I agree with the governor's take on restrictions on special housing units and solitary. My understanding is that the proposed changes don't include people in key block. So I'm wondering if you could tell us on any given day how many people are currently in key block, or in any given year, how many people are in key block?
I have those numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head. I can tell you that part of the reform that we just implemented did require us to provide a lot more amenities to fixed keep block units like group recreation, et cetera. But that isn't a matter that we're prepared to also look at as we discuss these issues.
Great. And a quick follow-up to Chairman Weprin's question about the data, the phone call recordings. What happens when an inmate and their sentence finishes? What do you do with that data? Are you selling that data? I'd like to know a little bit more about that.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, but what are you doing when the sentence finishes with that data?
They're preserved for 12 months, and then they're cut off.
Cut off as in destroyed, or? Okay, we'll follow up on that. And my last question is, knowing that sheriffs have a lot of leeway on this, what is your opinion, or do you know how many county jails are currently offering space or sharing facilities with ICE?
I couldn't answer that. I think that's a question that perhaps the State Commission of Correction could provide information on.
Yeah, they are not here on the list today, so I was hoping that you could offer some.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Gustavo Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, Commissioner. So the first thing I'll say is it's just a statement. It is obvious, as you made very clear earlier, that when the merger between docs and parole happened, that your responsibility is to provide them with all the resources they need, but you cannot speak on their behalf. I understand that perfectly. It is disappointing and unfortunate that the administration did not choose to have a representative of the parole board here. Obviously, there's a lot of things that you can't really answer, as you made clear before, on issues of policy, what happens to the parole board, et cetera. I'll just certainly add my voice to what many of my colleagues have said, that we need as many members of the parole board as possible. We can have statutorily up to 19. As many as we can would be best. So I speak to the administration now and say that we have, I am hopeful, because certainly there have been some resistance in the past from some of our Republican colleagues, but they are no longer running the show over in our House. So we would love to see a group of people coming to us as nominees, so that we can make sure that we can move them. So I would suggest, certainly this is, you can carry the message, but I'm sure they are listening.
Do that, Senator.
But I wanted to talk a little bit about solitary confinement, and actually, so define something for me. This isn't a term that I did not know about. What is keep lock? What does that refer to?
Keep lock is, I'll compare our system to the penal law. In penal law, the offense covers violations, misdemeanors, and felonies. So we have a three-tiered system. Tier 1 is like the equivalent of a violation. You did something wrong, but it's not part of your permanent record. A Tier 2 offense is like a misdemeanor. The punishment for a misdemeanor could be up to a year in jail, but you can't go to state prison. Similarly, with a Tier 2, you can get a keep lock sentence, but you can't get placed in SHU, you can't get a recommended loss of good time. So it's like the middle level of possible misconduct. And so one of the advantages of a keep lock sentence, like in a general confinement facility, a maximum security facility, is the individual doesn't get removed from the facility. He or she will serve their keep lock sentence.
So since my time is limited, I want to actually ask more specifics about what exactly it entails. So when you're saying keep lock, what exactly happens to the incarcerated person? Because if you have talking about a SHU, right, the person gets removed from their particular cell, right, and then placed in solitary confinement someplace in the facility, but by themselves for a while.
Right.
What happens when a keep lock? What does that mean?
In keep lock, they remain in their cell for 23 hours a day, but they get 1 hour of outdoor recreation.
Is there anybody else with them in the cell?
Sorry?
Is there anybody else with them? Are they allowed interaction with other people while they're in their cell?
Oh, they're allowed to interact with people on their unit. They can have conversations. There's not that isolation issue.
Okay, and so that isn't that isolation issue?
It's considered restrictive housing as well.
Okay.
In a general sense of the term. That's where the ACA and everybody else is moving.
And do you
All
know?
of us are trying to make changes in this area. Every
How many
system in the
people
country.
how many people in docks are currently, on any given day? How many people are on keep lock on a given day?
I can get you that number, Senator. I don't have it off the top of my head.
So I would really appreciate it if you could.
Sure.
If you could get us that number. It's the concern that many of us have is that maybe we're basically, since it's not categorized in the same way, since, as you are aware, and you can't comment on legislation, which I get, but there's many of us that have been very much pushing to get rid of solitary confinement and to change the way that works. And so we would be concerned that there's just a change in categorization of where people are kept. And last but not least, two years ago, I asked you about whether you remembered a guy named Rick Ramish.
Yes.
Rick Ramish. And
He's retired now.
Yes, and I asked you then, for those folks who do not know, this is a former Colorado Docks commissioner who slept overnight on a solitary confinement facility. And when I asked you that, and it was a great moment, I'm not going to deny that, but when I asked you whether you would be willing to do the same thing, whether you would be willing to stay overnight on a solitary confinement cell, your response was, Senator, it would be one of the best nights of sleep that I've had in my life. Ha ha ha. It's a good joke. It's a good one. I can't take it away from you. I'm going to ask you again. I'm going to ask you to take it seriously this time, considering that there's many of us who believe that this is torture, and it has been, determined like that in other instances, certainly in war. My question to you is, would you be willing to do that? You only have 5 seconds, but
Yeah, of course, Senator. If this will advance the agenda, if we will sit down and end up with legislation that we both think is prudent and in the best interest of New Yorkers, I'd be willing to do that. And Senator, I wasn't in any way trying to diminish or poke humor at SHU. It's a very serious issue. I was making fun of myself because my phone rings at every hour of the night. And if I'm in a correctional facility, anywhere in a correctional facility, I can't have a cell phone, I can't have a pager, no electronic devices. So anywhere in a correctional facility, I'm removed from any of the pressures.
thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Assembly.
Assemblyman Barkley.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, I had 2 questions. First is regarding a budget question. The government is proposing 69 million increase for the improvements to rehabilitation programs. Is that increase, is that going to go towards residential rehabilitation units and step-down units?
Yes, that's all for those units.
The whole 69 million. All right, well, that's easy enough. Have you watched Escape from Dannemora?
I've seen most of it, not all of it.
Could you just go through kind of what the process, because I think Docs initially was not going to allow filming at the facility, and then maybe the governor got involved, and now, there was filming there.
Senator, let me say, we have a long tradition in this state of cooperating with film projects. In fact, if you remember the classic films with James Cagney out of Sing Sing, Warner Brothers actually built a gym at Sing Sing because of all the films that we made there and cooperated with. There was a little hesitancy on our part initially because actually to film with that large a number of individuals coming into the facility, there was some concern. So we just wanted to explore different things, including, by the way, the population was going to be affected. We had to close off access to the yard for the filming. So in order to do that, and the film outfit agreed to do this as a means of ameliorating that. Everybody got, I believe, a gallon of ice cream. And I was surprised that the flavor they picked, apparently Panda Paw is the flavor that they like up there. I think the second time they got a chicken meal. But we were able to do that. We cooperated with the making of the film. It's entirely consistent with what we do for many, many years now. And this governor is all about being open for business in New York State.
I'm not really opining whether it was appropriate or not. What I found interesting is the fact that it seemed to be pretty strongly against the filming there, and then that opinion changed 180 degrees. So be it. What kind of ice cream was that? I didn't.
Panda Paw.
Oh, Panda Paw. All right. Thank you, Commissioner.
Is that the Ben and Jerry's ice cream?
We're going to assume no real pandas were used in the making of this movie. Are you done?
I am.
Okay. Senator Seward.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Senator.
Last year, to help address the problem, issue of contraband, DOCS had started a secure vendor package pilot program, in which was canceled. Can you share with us what, if anything, DOCS has started in terms of another program aimed at reducing contraband?
There's a lot of things that we're doing and continue to do to reduce contraband. We've expanded our canine units, and they are very, very effective at detecting drugs. We have 2 new devices that we've introduced. One, I'll get the technical name wrong, but I'll just tell you it's a device that's going to screen mail. We've purchased 2 of them. And once you run mail through these things, they can detect any number of drugs that are present in the mail. So if that is as successful as we think it is, we are going to make that go statewide with that. We also have another device that is able to get into areas, I think it's called a boroscope, areas that are hard to get to, hard to see visually, like radiators and cell tracks, where individuals might hide contraband, like certain types of blades. So those are the things that we are pursuing right now as well.
Why was the secure vendor package, the pilot program, why was that canceled?
Well, we learned the hard way that there were things we hadn't carefully thought of. Okay. And even though it's been placed on hold, it's not totally terminated, we've used this opportunity to learn from the advocates. We've used this opportunity to get feedback from our superintendents. It is something that we would explore down the road. But as I said last year, there's so many things that we as an agency are doing. Right, so many things in the transformation to the tablets, the programs that were initiated, the SHU, the expansion of the college programs, all kinds of mental health programs that we're bringing online, concerns about wellness for staff. We don't need an additional one if we're not ready for it, and that's something that we'll cross that bridge at the appropriate time.
Can you describe any other efforts DOCS has undertaken in the last year to make the facilities, safer for both the inmates and employees?
Yes.
The
other big thing we're doing is we're spending millions on fixed camera systems. We're about to complete the one at Clinton, and we've got about 7 or 8 facilities that they're going to go out to bid, and then they'll be ready in 2 years. We also have body cameras. We have the biggest body camera initiative in the country. We just completed Taconic, and I think before then they were something like 650. And we've got a grant of about $800,000 from the feds to expand this body camera pilot. So that is going to be something that we're going to rely upon to help make our system safer. It helps keep everybody in their lane, so to speak, the fixed camera systems as well as the body cameras.
Now, is there any legislation that you would recommend us to pass that would help make the facilities safer? I mean, is there anything statutorily that's
Pass
needed?
the Governor's Article 7 as is.
Okay. And my final question, following up on Selman Barkley's question, what did you think of the series Escape at Dannemora? I did watch the entire show.
Senator, respectfully, that's a pool of water I'm not going to wade in for the following reason. 2 of the principal individuals that the story was about are still serving their sentences. with this agency, and even though they didn't get to see it, people visited them and told them what it was about, and both of them have come out very strongly disputing what was in the film. So rather than add another controversy to my list that I have plenty of, I will not weigh in on that issue.
I was giving you a chance to be a film critic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assembly.
Assemblymember Palmisano.
Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. Appreciate it. I have some questions to talk on. I've been, as you know, pretty critical of the administration and what's going on at the Department of Corrections for a number of issues. I think probably one of the
or hold it or move it closer to you.
I think probably one of the most serious issues that are going on in our correctional facilities today is the dramatic rise in assaults on our staff and on inmates. Since 2013, I know the governor's talked about all the prisons he's closed. I think that's helped lead to a powder keg environment. Since 2013, there's been a 66% increase on assaults on staff statewide, a 65% increase on inmate staff, inmate on inmate assaults. Just 82% in the past year. That's a dramatic problem that's not being addressed because I think of the powder keg environment that we see. Drugs is certainly part of that process. I know you talked about some issues that you're trying to deal with the address of that issue. I know last year I asked for your statistics on the positive drug test. You provided that. I mean, thousands of people testing positive for drugs in our prisons. That's unacceptable. So why not provide more tools to help address that issue? You mentioned drug dogs. Are we using them at every single one of our 54 correctional facilities? And if not, why not?
Well, first of all, canines are expensive, and they do require a lot of staff. We're getting a lot of bang for our buck with what we're using now. But going back on the random drug tests, we tested 1% of the population last year, which is almost 1,000, and only 5% or just under 5% were positive. So I don't agree with your characterization that drugs are rampant throughout our system or that there's a powder keg atmosphere there. I'm very concerned about assaults, as everybody is, rightfully so. One assault is one too many. But the assault in the department is completely different from an assault in the penal law. Any attack is defined as an assault. An inmate brushes up, bumps the shoulder of a correctional officer, that's an assault. You'd be laughed out of court if you tried to prosecute something in the community with an assistant district attorney. So our population is going down, and we have a lot of vacancies in our system. And compared to where we were when we used to house 90 inmates in dormitories and double bunk and double cell, it's a totally different landscape right now.
With regard to the double cell and double bunking, because I'm aware that obviously there's 6,800 top beds that exist in double bunk situations throughout the state. Now, the administration and you constantly talk about how many excess beds there aren't being utilized. So in that situation, double bunking or double celling has two inmates in a close confines, whether it's in a dormitory setting or a maximum security facility. That is a powder keg environment. It's a powder keg environment for other inmates. It's certainly a powder keg environment for our correctional officers who do a dangerous job. So if you have all these excess beds that you claim, and we have 6,800 top bed double bunks, why not remove the top bunks, double bunks altogether? Make that part of your investment, because you're doing a lot of investment on reconstruction in other areas. That should be the first thing you do. Get rid of the double bunks and double cells. Let each individual, give them a little dignity. Let them be in their own individual space, which will also create a safer environment for our corrections officers and our professionals working there, and also a safer environment for other inmates, because that's part of the powder keg environment I'm talking about, Commissioner, that I think is being ignored by this administration. The drug test that we talked about, I said 1%. I think from the numbers I have from 15, 16, 17, about 5,000 or 6,000 positive test results. That's 5,000 or 6,000 too many. That shouldn't be happening. We should be, and if drug dogs are really expensive, but we're talking about a public safety issue, you know, we're putting money in all these other places. Why not put the money into the drug dogs? Because we know they're successful. They should be one at every correctional facility in the state. Let's make the investment. Let's make our corrections officers safe. Let's make the other inmates safe who are just trying to do their time. And penalize people who are trying to get drugs in these facilities, because they're doing it, they're being successful at it. We need to provide our tools and to our corrections officers so they can do the job that they want to do to keep us safe.
Salomon said a lot of different things there. Let me just sort out the double celling, double bunking argument. Double celling is what you find in our maximum security facilities. And way back in '95, when we were very pressed for space, we converted about 5% of the cells in 16 of our male maximum security facilities. And we were very stressed to do that. I've basically taken all of them down, my predecessor as well. There's only a very small number that are left of those original cells that were built for one-person use. They're in Auburn, and I think a few at downstate. Auburn for the depot because it helps with the movement, and downstate because it helps with the program. Otherwise, they've all come down. There are other double cells where the cell was built to hold two individuals. They have at least 105 square feet. All of our S blocks have 105 square feet. 5 Points, 105 square feet, and upstate. So there's two in a cell there, but there's no, they were built to hold two individuals. The double bunking that you describe in our mediums, there's, in a prototype dorm, there are 60 individuals where we used to hold 90. The back 10 are double bunked, 2. But that's consistent with the State Commission of Corrections rules and regulations that allow as many as 60 in a multiple occupancy unit. So I am aware of nothing, and we look at grievances and we look at a lot of different things, that specific housing arrangement causes tension in our medium security general confinement facilities. I agree with you. I'm troubled with the increasing number of assaults, and we're looking at a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, you know, investing in things like college, you know, that creates an environment that leads individuals to follow examples of the classroom leader versus the gang leader.
Thank you.
Senator, I just want to say, Commissioner, that although I agree with my colleague that there are a lot of problems in our prisons, I have to say that I think you've done an excellent job as acting commissioner. And the only thing I hope for is that now you can become the actual commissioner, now that you've gotten a raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Gustavo Rivera. Oh, no, you went, all right. I'm so sorry. Senator Zeldin Myrie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I just want to reiterate Chairman Weprin's sentiment on prison education. I had the honor of teaching constitutional law at Auburn Correctional Facility, and it's something that's very important to me, and I'm glad to hear that it's something that you are supportive of as well. I am also heartened to see that DOCS is really supportive of parolees and their success, and I wanted to get your thoughts and very brief analysis. The governor signed an executive order last year granting parolees the right to vote, and I wanted to see what the successes and failures of that program is, if you had any stats on how many people have taken advantage of the new right, and just to get your general thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, I think the governor's action was entirely consistent with the fundamental change in the penal law that was made years ago when we said, in addition to everything else, it's a fundamental purpose to promote the successful reentry of individuals into society. And getting them civically involved is certainly one important way to do that. I should point out that there was already a law on the books going back to 2010 that the legislature enacted. It's codified in Correctional Law Section 75, and it specifies that every individual who maxes out of a prison, right? So there's no parole time to serve, but when that person maxes out of a correctional facility, the obligation was placed upon me to give them a voter application form, to give them a form from the Board of Education that explains the importance of voting, and one other thing in relation to voting. And I'm not aware of any single problem that ever came about as a result of that. And last year, to give you some numbers, 2,100 individuals maxed out of our correctional facilities. So that many individuals under the statute had to be given all of those voter forms explaining how to register, where they would go, et cetera, et cetera. The governor's pardon initiative was simply an extension of that. We gave them the list of the people that were released on parole. They determined who was worthy to get the conditional pardon. We ensured that the individual got the conditional pardon. I have no way of knowing how many of them chose to exercise their right to vote. I'm not aware of any problems, but I think it's entirely consistent with where we're moving as a state to get people locally involved in their civic participation as a means of rehabilitation.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I wasn't asking, of course, it would be really difficult for you to ascertain who actually voted, given that we have a secret ballot in this country. But I think that it is, what I wanted to know was who was taking advantage of the conditional pardons, right? I think that our body, we have legislation that would make it less onerous. I think there are a lot of parolees who are still unaware of their right, and right now they have to take an extra step. Albeit I think a very important first step as enacted by the governor. But I think that we are considering granting rights just by virtue of them being out of incarceration. And so I just wanted to know if the administration had stats on how many conditional pardons were issued for the purposes of them voting.
Yeah, we do have the stats on that. I know it was many thousands that were issued. And I know that when they were issued, we had a process in place to make sure when they met with their parole officer, they were actually given the conditional pardon. They were given all the necessary forms to explain. I can get you the exact number. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it was many thousands.
And I know you have said several times today that you don't comment on pending legislation, but would it be fair to say that DOCS is supportive of parolees being civically engaged and having as many opportunities to do so as possible?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've been joined by Senator Betty Little. I didn't recognize her earlier. Assembly.
Assembly Member Weprin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had a lot of discussion about shoe reform and money for shoe reform. Just a specific question about the $69 million that's in DOC's capital for the DOC's shoe reform proposal. Does that include the money from the New York Civil Liberties Union settlement?
No, this would be entirely different. Because basically in the 90s, as I said, when we had the problem with a lot of disruptive individuals, we had to quickly build these S blocks. And that is where we would have to spend the money to actually convert them to these RR units so that we can have the out-of-cell programming and the office space. To just give you some comparison, the Marcy S block, where we now have the RMH TU, we built a separate program building. Anybody that's toured that facility where we treat the seriously mentally ill, I'm sure would agree we did not spare any expense. They have big, wide open areas for classroom participation. They have areas for group recreation. We did it right, and that's what we plan to do with this group going forward.
So are we going to need more money to complete the NICLU settlement? Would it be necessary to have more money other than besides that 69
Well, we have to staff the 252-bed unit, so the budget, there's money in the budget, if you approve as is, for us to open the Southport 252-bed unit.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Gallivan.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Senator.
I'd like to follow up on a couple of things that we've already discussed, and I'll start with the secure vendor program. I was going to ask the status, and you indicated that it's not a lost cause, so to speak, but what is the actual status? Are you actively looking at the problems with it? Is it somewhere in line and trying to implement?
We're continuing to get feedback from our superintendents. We've looked at what we've done wrong, but as we do that, we're looking at what we're also providing to the population and the next steps so that, you know, where we might be in reevaluating this after we've gone system-wide with the tablets and how that might play out is something that we're weighing and balancing. So it is, you're right, it's not a lost cause. It is something that we're still considering and taking feedback should we decide to revisit it a point down the road.
I mean, we know that contraband continues to be a problem. You've talked about some of the measures that you're taking to try to limit contraband. But I recall our conversations over the years about the promise of the secure vendor program and being able to control what comes in. And absent data that shows that we're doing a significantly better job of controlling the contraband and then what follows, the violence. I would hope that that is something, it's been successful in other states, that you continue to actively look at. So let's follow to the safety and security. I know you testified to certain things. Senator Seward, Assemblyman Palmisano talked about it, and he mentioned in particular some statistics. One that if I calculated correctly, that combined assaults on staff and inmate on staff, inmate on inmate, is up 42% since the NICLU settlement regarding special housing units. Do you see, is there a correlation in your mind between the two, the 40% fewer people in SHU since that settlement and a 42% increase in assaults?
No, I don't see that. And I know that one of the categories I think we're down, and that's the inmate on inmate assaults. I have to double check. But I don't see a correlation with that, Senator.
Well, perhaps down year to year, but we have, if we go back 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, we're still significantly high. I agree with Assemblyman Lentil. I know that you've made efforts, you're very sincere in concern for your people and ensuring safe facilities. So the job that your staff does, they have a tremendous challenge. There's no question about it. And it's an enormous agency, and every single thing that you do I recognize, whether it's training or equipment, costs an incredible amount of money. But I think we owe it to the staff and the citizens of the state to do the best we can in properly equipping and training them. And similarly, we owe it to the inmates who are there and their families and the communities, because obviously if they can't be safe, how can they be rehabilitated if they're afraid to go to programs or participate? So I know over the years the different measures that you've taken, and I won't ask you again to repeat the things that you've said, but are you able to tie statistics to anything? Like, for instance, the use of canines, and correlate it that we have reduced contraband by X%. The use of body cameras, and this has reduced assaults by X%. The use of fixed cameras. And, I mean, have you done that at all? Because then we can focus, we can look at some of the things that work to reduce the violence and contribute to our safety instead of, again, I fully respect the enormity of the job that you have and all these new ideas that come along, and you having to look at, because of the whims of the executive or members of the legislature, 87 different things to implement. But are you using data to implement any of these things?
We're using a lot of different data in many ways. I think it's very hard to get down into to the weeds like that and pinpoint cause and effect on different things. Backing up to the assault numbers, while they're up, the number of injuries, right, way down. It's something close to 90% had either, or higher, had no injury or a minor injury. Only a very small number had moderate injury, and I'm not belittling that. Any injury, moderate, is bad, and serious injury. We had no severe injuries because we broke it down. So even though the assaults numbers are up and disconcerting, staff aren't getting injured, and certainly the pepper spray that we've used can really allow staff to intervene, break up a serious fight without having to resort to batons or rolling around many times. And I've required all my staff, including myself, to undergo what pepper spray is like, and it is very debilitating. So if anything to increase staff safety like that and keep the population safe, we will continue to pursue.
Love to continue the conversation, but out of time. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. Assembly.
Yes, Assemblymember Palmisano again.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner, again. I don't have really one question, but just a couple of things. I'm going to write an issue that I hope you can respond relative to the bedding issue. That I have some information I would like you to clarify. Also on the number of positive drug tests. I know you gave me statistics from before. I'd like to see the statistics from last year as well. Also, I wanted to just comment on this SHU reform. I'm very concerned about it. Quite frankly, I think what the settlement and what you see being proposed by the governor and what I've seen on legislation being proposed will take a very important safety tool away from our corrections officers who do a very dangerous job. I think that, what incentive is there going to be for, and we got to admit, there's some very, very dangerous people in our prisons. What incentive is there for a prisoner to not assault or try to kill an inmate, another inmate or another corrections officer because they can? Well, I can sit out 15 days in a shoe or 30 days in a shoe. What incentive is there? I mean, that needs to be an important disciplinary tool used. If someone's bringing drugs in there and dealing drugs in the prisons, what incentive is there for them to not do it because I can handle 15 days or I can handle 30 days? You're taking very important tools away from our corrections officers to do a very dangerous job. And as part of that powder keg environment, I think it's making it dangerous for our corrections officers. It's making it dangerous for other inmates in those facilities. I really wish you put the brakes on this type of reform because or also at least try to provide some other tools and resources, more staffing, better staffing and more resources to them because they have a tough job. And I don't think sometimes the administration, the governor, takes that into consideration. And I think if you talk to some of the corrections officers, I don't feel like they feel like the administration has their backs and their morale is down on some of the things that we see in the pipeline. And I really wish you would take that into consideration. And remember, these brave men and women who work in those facilities go to work each day and are a place that no one wants to know what goes on behind those walls. They just want people to stay there. But they risk their lives each and every day, and we continue to take away resources. And that's why we continue to see these rise in assaults, and they're substantial rises. You know, with the prison closures, I think that's led to it, the drug problem. You know, we need to be more aggressive on that front to make sure the men and women who are in our facilities working there are safe. So I would encourage you to please take the brakes on some of this shoe reform because it's dangerous, because there's proposals even coming through the legislature that would even, I think, make it even worse. So I hope you take that into consideration as we move forward.
Assemblyman, let me just say a few things very quickly. If the governor's proposal is enacted as is, it's not going to have somebody in SHU for 30 days and back in general confinement. It's going to be something very similar to what we do with the seriously mentally ill. They're going to be transferred to an area where they can still be separated and safely secured. They're going to come out in restraints. They're going to have to earn incentives. So safety is not going to be compromised in that way. The other thing I will say is this. I don't know too many sitting governors that would walk through a maximum security cell block without any advance warning. And he did that at Great Meadow because he wanted to see firsthand what a lockdown was about. And we talked to the superintendent to get the feedback on what we were doing. He also went to Clinton. He also went to Green, to the S block there. And when he was first elected and before he was sworn in, he went to Sing Sing. So he cares about what's going on. He's also charged me, and every other corrections commissioner in this country is working on this, is staff wellness, because the stress of the job is taking its toll. And so I've convened a committee of people to work on programs that we can help find constructive ways to reduce the stress. There's no question working in a tough environment, especially in a maximum security facility, is very stressful. And I don't want to see people get high blood pressure, turn to alcohol, have their marriages break up, or any of the other normal things. I want to be able to intervene and give them a safe environment and give them practical means by which their life and health can get better, because they do a great job. I think we have the most progressive correction system in the country, and all the things that we're able to do with the thousands of volunteers that come in, all the program partnerships we have, only work because of the staff we have.
Commissioner, I have to stop you, but I want to thank you for that long explanation, and just on behalf of all the people who are going to be testifying at 11 o'clock tonight, just because of their high blood pressure and marital issues and other things. Senator Diane Savino.
Thank you. I just want to, Commissioner, first, good to see you again. And I just want to, at least we don't have to talk about overtime. We don't have to talk about the shortage of nurses. But I do want to follow up on this issue of inmate and corrections officers, the levels of assaults going up. And it's amazing because in spite of all of the efforts that you guys have put in, the training, the de-escalation training, the pepper spray training, cameras, body cameras, the cell sense program, we're still seeing almost a doubling of assaults. And I know that you just recently said that you're talking to other commissioners in other states. So is this a problem as well in other places where they've instituted a segregation plan similar to the one that the state has adopted with the New York Civil Liberties Union?
I don't see them as connected, Senator, but I belong to an association. Mm-hmm. We create surveys. We share information. We get together. I can ask them if they're seeing similar rises. I can tell you that everybody in general has their own gang issues, right? Mm-hmm. Wherever part of the country you're in, gangs may be different, but you're always trying to battle, keep them from getting control of things. Every time there's been a lockdown, almost invariably, it was related to one gang trying to assert control over the phones or getting too pushy and then getting pushed back. So we try and introduce all of the pro-social things for meaningful involvement among the population. That's why I have thousands of volunteers who have the status of unpaid employees to deliver all these additional programs. That's why I have rehabilitation through the arts. That's why I have puppies behind bars. That's why I bring in an entire symphony orchestra to perform at a maximum security facility. All of these things are helpful in reducing tensions. But I'll be in touch with my colleagues across the country, see what their experience as well. Because
perhaps maybe a study to look at what's best practices in other states to see if there's something that we're not capturing here. And again, I will say this, you guys have done an amazing job of training and putting in technology, but yet and still we're seeing this result. And the safety and security of the workforce and the inmates is of paramount importance when you are the caretaker of human beings. So, you know, we want to be helpful to it. I know that in the governor's executive budget, he proposes eliminating a $1 million legislative grant that goes towards facility safety measures. I'm sure he's going to ask us to buy it back. But I think that's the kind of stuff we should be increasing, not decreasing. And finally, on one thing, because you have patients, you have inmates who are also patients, some of them would qualify under the state's medical marijuana program for either treatment of an underlying condition or if they are addicted to opioids, we added medical marijuana as a medical treatment, similar to methadone, Vivitrol, Suboxone, as an alternative during a medical treatment program. Has docs started utilizing it? Are any patients, any inmates requesting to become patients? Have you had any interaction with that yet at all?
I'm not aware that anybody's asked for that treatment as of yet, Senator, but I have a group working and studying all aspects of the law and how we're going to have to adjust to whatever the final law is that's implemented. I also understand that under the separate health presentation, they'll try and answer all questions related to the cannabis initiative.
But you do have inmates who would qualify as patients under the medical marijuana program because they have a qualifying condition. I'm just curious, are any of them utilizing it? And if not, is it because they don't know about it or because they can't afford it? That might be an issue.
I'm not aware of them using it, but I know we use other treatment modalities to deal with pain and anything else they might be experiencing.
I'm not sure who in your administration would be involved in this, but I would actually like to know. I'd like to have a conversation with them. It could be the cost of the medication is prohibitive for inmates, and if that's the case, maybe there's something we can do about that. But
okay,
thank you.
I'll follow up on that, Senator.
Thank you. Assembly. They got some more.
Assembly
You're never
Member
getting out.
Colton.
Thank you, Commissioner. There was a couple of questions that I just wanted to ask in terms of some statistics. In the facilities that you have in New York, do you know approximately how many deaths have occurred while people have been in custody?
Yeah, I have that number. I don't remember off the top of my head. There's a number of natural deaths every year. We follow all of that. Every time there's a death, regardless of whether it appears to be natural causes or not, there's a requirement by the county law that there must be an autopsy, and I know the State Commission of Correction follows up on them as well. So for any death, there's always an official report that's done, an autopsy, and a report by the State Commission of Correction, and I get their final reports and review them as well. I can get you the number
Yes,
if you're looking
if
for
you could do
calendar
that, I
year
would appreciate that.
2018.
Also, how many deaths have been by suicide, if there are any?
Yeah, last year we had 13. One is one too many, and it's a serious challenge because of its unpredictability. You don't know what the final thing is in someone's life that may cause them to decide this is it. It could be the wife saying, I can't do this anymore, I want a divorce, because you were away, our 13-year-old child got pregnant, whatever the challenges are. So we are constantly looking at how to get better at trying to spot the factors. My associate commissioner in charge of mental health is always looking at initiatives. We're working with our Office of Mental Health. We're looking at what other state agencies are doing. We're reinforcing it's not just the mental health practitioners, that it could be the program rec leader, it could be the chaplain that someone in trouble might be comfortable talking to. So we put signs in our visiting rooms for families. If you've had a visit and you've given somebody bad news, let us know in advance. So we're successful a lot of times at keeping an attempted suicide and an attempt because staff were there to cut somebody down, et cetera. But 13 was the number we had last year, and it's always a tragedy when they occur.
And what was the total number of inmates that are in the system?
The population today is 47,152.
Also, did any of the deaths occur while confined to a SHU unit?
They occur in different areas. Sometimes they've occurred when someone was in what we call a residential crisis treatment cell, an observation cell. Then they think they're cleared and they get released. They could commit suicide there. They could commit suicide in general confinement. I'm sure of the 13, if I go back and look, maybe some number of them were in SHU. It all depends. They're all over the map.
Okay, so do you have an estimate of how many might have, whether they were by suicide or otherwise, died in a SHU unit?
I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but I will get that for you.
Okay, thank you. And when an inmate passes away, is there a particular protocol by which the family is notified, and how quickly, is that done?
Yeah, that's there's a whole set of protocols in place. It's a very difficult job that we do. We ask our chaplains to be the people that call up the family and give them the terrible news and make sure they're informed as quickly as possible.
I think, basically, I think that's it. If you could get us the statistics in terms of the number of suicides and also the deaths that have occurred in the SHU units, that would be helpful.
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Brian Benjamin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I wanted to talk a little bit about technical parole violations. But before, let me give you a little bit of context. I'm very passionate about us closing Rikers Island sooner than later. And it has come to my attention that one of the fastest growing populations on Rikers are those who are there for technical parole violations. And so I wanted to ask you about the review that your department did along with the Board of Parole and the Reentry Council, and get a sense from you, was bringing an individual before a judge for a hearing after there was a violation, is that part of revisions that you're making or that you have made?
Well, what we're looking at, which is the guidelines, which is basically kind of like the grid that a sentencing judge would follow. Here, these would be what the ALJs would follow for a particular infraction. So we're looking at a lot of ways to try and streamline the process. I have my counsel looking at different things. The statute sets out a preliminary hearing, a final hearing. Is there flexibility there? We certainly don't want to have people waste away locally. We want them to have the quickest hearing possible. And where possible, we agree, there's a lot of dispositions where it's revoke and restore. The ALJ will say, okay, what you did was wrong, but we're going to restore you to community supervision, but you need to go to a program. Many of the individuals that are parole violators are absconders.
Right.
And so that's the challenge, because they've already absconded from supervision. Then we finally take them into custody, and so now they're lodged at Rikers Island.
I'm sorry. I should have been more specific. I'm talking about before you actually take them to Rikers Island, having a hearing by a judge before they are taken into custody.
That's
that was
pending legislation that you have?
That is the pending legislation that I have.
Therefore, I can't comment.
You're paying attention, yes.
Thank you. Assembly?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
now I was
excuse
asking
me.
you, so I'm sorry. I was asking you, do you have any reservations about that, the pending legislation that I have on that front?
Senator, I always am mindful of what the bureaucratic steps would be, the practical considerations, whatever they would require. I have the same general goals that you have. I don't want to needlessly have people swept up if they don't present a risk and they can continue to comply with the conditions of supervision. But I can't weigh in on what you're contemplating and whether that would present a lot of bureaucratic challenges or not.
Can I ask you this? The types of violations that you most see, would you say that those violations, in your estimation, require custody?
Require confinement?
Confinement, yes. I mean, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think we've bought into the graduated sanctions that, and it's not a question of even, what my parole revocation specialists agree. The ALJ makes the final decision. They hear the evidence. The individual is represented by a lawyer. The people that work for me are, in effect, the prosecutors, but the ALJs are independent. They work for the Board of Parole. They work for the chairwoman. Right. And so they're the ones that make the final decision. Sometimes we disagree with their decision. Sometimes we think, look, this individual has done 3 or 4 different things and they're not getting the message, and maybe the ALJ said, well, I'm going to give them one more chance. We're going to put them back into the community. I think it's a complex issue, but I do think the guidelines going forward are going to be a big change in who comes back and how long they come back for.
One last quick question. What is the average timeline of someone in confinement after a technical parole violation, on average?
How long they're held locally?
How long are they held until they actually...
It varies for different regions of the state, and I know that I have the number for New York City, but I don't want to guess wrong.
I heard it was in the 7-day range. If you can confirm that for me.
30-something days is about what I'm...
30-something? I heard it was more than that.
I think it's either 39, 40, 42 days, something like that.
Commissioner, will you agree to get the senator the
answer? Yes, I will.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Assembly?
Yes, Assembly Member Barkley.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, just hearing your little testimony from before, I just want to follow up on the double bunking thing. How do you decide when an inmate, who's in the double bunks versus a single bed?
Basically, it's where the vacancy is. So, and usually, if you just arrive at a correctional facility and you get assigned to dorm, and I have a classification and movement unit that identifies where the vacancies are in the system and whether a particular individual could go to a particular facility if there are no known enemies, what their mental health level is and what their medical requirements are, and then they would go to where the vacancies are, and we can continually move people. Somebody that's been in a double bunk for some period of time, if there's a single cell vacancy, they get moved, and then the double bunk in the back of the dorm can get filled.
Do the inmates sign a waiver to be on that?
No.
They don't have to sign.
No.
And then
I think you're thinking of what we used to do with double celling when we had that in effect, because inmates would go down. There was a general SCOC rule that you couldn't be in a double cell for more than 60 days unless you signed a waiver. So some individuals will get closer to home. They'd be in Greenhaven, they'd sign the waiver because you'd have to agree to stay longer than 60 days to ultimately end up in a vacant cell, single cell in Greenhaven. So that was a rule from a long time ago, but since we've taken down all those double cells, it's no longer applicable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Betty Little.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. So a couple of quick questions in regard to some of the facilities, the 9 facilities I have. And Adirondack, I understand that you're pretty close, or maybe you've already started inmates getting there.
It's up and running, yes.
Right, and that's really going to be a very effective facility, my understanding of it is. So I'd like to visit that soon.
Yes.
But the second one is Mariah Shock, and I know shock is something very important to you since you authored the whole program in the beginning. in the budget, I understand you have some increases in eligibility. Could you explain that so people could understand that and our chances?
The budget proposes allowing a judge to issue a court-ordered enrollment order for someone who's convicted either of robbery in the second degree, the particular subdivision where you are aided by another actually present, as opposed to the weapon or causing physical injury. So for that cohort, as well as for burglary in the second degree, where you enter a building unlawfully with the intent to commit a crime, but the building is a dwelling. So, for example, there's so many low-level individuals that commit those crimes. Technically, or it's a violent felony offense. Technically, you're not eligible under current law. But we're creating the opportunity for the judge to issue a shock enrollment order, because it simply could be two kids that said, give me your, candy bar or whatever, and that's robbery in the second degree. It could be somebody saw a cellar door open, goes in and grabs, a pair of roller skates, and they're still convicted of a serious crime. But the shock program, which we strongly believe in, and I'm very enamored with Mariah in particular, it wasn't that long ago, I went to a graduation, and if there is a single facility where everybody's so together, they are so married to the program, and they want everybody to be successful. And if you ever go to a graduation and you see the platoons come out, it's like, Paris Island for the Marine Corps. And then you see in the education buildings all the artwork that they've done to draw pictures of historical figures in civil rights movements. So they really, it's a great, great program. It was even featured on German television. So I strongly support, and if this law is enacted, I'll work with OCA to make sure all the judges know about this, and I'll also help ensure that our district attorneys throughout the state know this option as well.
All right, thank you, because we know we have more capacity at Mariah, and we would really like to see it filled. I don't know if not having a fence makes a difference, but I said if so, I'll say build a fence. So, but the other thing is I just read that Vermont was sending inmates and contracting with prisons in Pennsylvania. And, if we have capacity at a place like Mariah, right on the Vermont border, other than Lake Champlain, would that ever be something that we would look at?
I've not been approached by the Commissioner of Vermont about that possibility. I'm not sure which kind of individuals they're looking to. I believe, I'd have to double check with my counsel, it might be legally possible, and certainly it's legally possible and it makes fiscal sense. We'd consider it, I guess, but
okay. Well, if it's an idea worth pursuing, maybe we could make it legislatively, legally possible as well. But thank you for all you do there, for throughout the system, and it certainly has a lot of stress and a lot of complications, but I appreciate all the work you do. And thank you for appreciating Mariah Schock as much as I do.
Thank you for your friendship to me and to this department, Senator.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblies last, and then one more in the Senate.
Assemblymember Fahey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Commissioner. Pleasure to have you here today. I want to start by saying just a thanks in general to you and your office, and to Mr. Kelly. Every time I have to, I don't say this to every agency that comes before us, but yours has been one of the most responsive, even if you can't always give us the answer we're looking for, but often we are dealing with very emotional issues and families involved in care for their loved ones who may be incarcerated, and your agency has been tremendously responsive. I also just want to say that I appreciate your implementation and aggressiveness in trying to work with the Change the Age legislation that was so important to many of us up here in the legislature, along with the changes on the SHU, the single housing units. It still shares some of the concerns that were mentioned about assault on workers, so I just want to echo some of those comments. And then I have two questions. One, I appreciated your comments about the opioids and really some of the newer programs that you have, including the MAP program in a number of your facilities. But I just wondered, is there more that we can be doing, especially because I've heard a number of concerns raised about the aftercare, that as inmates are released, that we are seeing overdoses within those first few weeks? And is there more that we can do to make sure that we are transitioning those who may have drug addictions and problems with aftercare to make sure that they're getting the right treatment as they exit?
Well, one of the things that we are doing now, it's in connection with our Narcan program. It's part of what we call Phase 3 of transitional services, preparing individuals for release. We not only teach them how to use a Narcan kit, we teach them about the risks that are out there should somebody use again. So we drill that message into them as part of Phase 3. And when they also report the first time, if they're going out on supervision, to their parole officer. Let me say, we are also in constant contact with our partners at Oasis, and they've been fantastic at helping us get our feet wet and now expanding our program. So anything that they can tell us or point us to, certainly there are individuals who we continue to require drug treatment in the program, so we connect them to drug treatment programs when that's established as a condition of their supervision. But we'll get further guidance from Oasis if there's other things that we should be looking at, because we agree there is a release. There is a risk when somebody's released, but our initiative now with those on MAT that are coming back as technical parole violators, the short sentenced individuals for Elmira, and the additional facilities that we're going to expand to and taking in others from the counties will create, in effect, a continuous loop of MAT, and we're looking for that to be a hopeful big initiative.
Thank you, Commissioner. I look forward to hearing more on that as we continue to tackle this this horrific drug crisis, opioid crisis in this state. Last question. The parole board, I understand that there are still a number of vacancies. I'm told there are 7 vacancies still. Can you give us any update on that and the timeliest? Because I understand that that does hinder the timeliness of having parole meetings and hearings. Can you tell us where we are with the vacancies and give us any update on that?
No, unfortunately, I can't, Assemblywoman. That's the Board of Parole is independent, and the decision when and whether to fill additional vacancies is with the chamber. So I don't control any of that.
Okay.
But I appreciate, and I'll certainly relay your concerns and everyone else who's raised that concern.
Okay. Thank you again, Commissioner. I appreciate your work very much so. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think we've actually run out of people to ask you questions. Appreciate very much your being here today. I should be careful. Don't come into the audience now and say, I want to ask questions. I do appreciate your time and the work you do for the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.